Hi, my name is Cedric Young, and today I'll be presenting to you the evolution of player safety in American football. Throughout time in America, the majority of sports highlight athletic abilities of athletes. However, the game of football highlights hitting, especially during the early to late 1900s. With the emergence of the public viewage during the early 1900s, such as live television, sports was to be seen globally but predominantly in the United States. Phrases such as bone crushing, helmet knocking, and bullfight were used to promote violence, which is what the NFL's audience gravitated to. Over the past few years, football has advanced itself by protecting players on and off the field. With the advancement of technology, football associations such as the NFL implemented the frequent use of flags to ensure player safety, especially in the present time. Although the viewing rate of football has decreased over the years because of this, football associations have taken the initiative to protect players over viewer consumption, which is best for everyone involved. With this being said, football has evolved since its presence and has the initiative to ensure player safety. Since 1869, the first football game, the evolution of football equipment has come a long way. Today, helmets, protective face masks, shoulder pads, thigh pads, knee pads, and cleats are worn to improve player safety and limit football athletes' chances of getting hurt. The evolution of helmets. In the early 1900s, the first helmet were just leather straps wrapped together and placed on the player's head. Although they didn't have much of an impact, they were a starting stance for what would come in the later years. In 1910, the first surrounded leather helmet protected the whole player's head but did little to no effect on protecting the actual player. In the 1920s to 1930s, however, the emergence of hard leather strapped inside and around the helmet and a chin strap helped to protect players. In the 1950s to 1960s, the emergence of the first single bar face mask came, as well as plastic helmets. In the 1960s to 1970s, the double face mask made its appearance, but it wasn't as advanced as the 1890s and 1990s. During that time, football teams would associate themselves by placing colors like seen in these two pictures. They would associate themselves and have a little bit more fun with the helmets. In 2000 to 2010, we saw a little bit more advancement in the technology with synthetic fibers and carbon fibers inside the helmets. And as we know today, in 2020 and 2022, the more advanced helmets. So it's pretty wide range over the last 100 years. Now the face mask. Face masks first came into vogue in football during the early 1920s to late 1920s. Over time, face masks became more common as well as advanced in order to protect players from face and head injuries. In the early 1930s, there wasn't a face mask at all. It was just the helmet, as shown previously. It wasn't until the 1960s there was the first single bar face mask on the plastic helmet. In the 1980s, the first emergence of the double single bar, and in the 2000s, there was a double bar with also linings on them, so they're more advanced in the 1980s. Shoulder pads. From 1900 to present time. Shoulder pads were introduced just 8 years after the first public game of football. They are arguably the most protective equipment to be introduced in the football besides the helmet. Shoulder pads have advanced just as much as helmets, if not even more. Timeline of rule implementations in the NFL. After learning about the evolution of football equipment, the NFL also implemented extra rules in order to co-sign with protecting player safety. Rules implemented from 1985 to 1990. As professional football gained notoriety, the NFL Association decided that they can implement rules that will hopefully better the game in positive ways. To begin, in 1985, the NFL declared that the ball is dead when any runner slides to the ground. The NFL implemented the rule in order to protect players from oncoming hits while trying to avoid them. In 1989, the NFL declared that blocking, hitting below the waist on a kicker, runner, or quarterback is illegal. This rule did very well because it decreased 30% in seasonal injuries across the NFL. So that did major works. It would only take another 5 years before defenders could adjust to the changing game of professional football. Rules implemented from 91 to 2002. Moving into the late 1900s, or the early to late 1900s, the NFL became more vigilant about protecting defenseless players. To start, in 1992, the NFL declared that the chop block is illegal on some running plays. In 1994, the NFL then declared that it is illegal for a defender to block low during a punt, field goal, or extra point attempt. From 1997 to 99, blocking from behind, below the knees, in the clipping zone is prohibited, a much-needed rule to protect player safety and an all-around fairness of the game. In 2002, the NFL declared that the chop block technique is illegal on all kicking plays. Rules implemented from 2005 to 2010. Shifting into a new time period, the NFL ramped up its rules and regulations in order to adapt to modern times. To start, in 2005, the NFL introduced the term unnecessary roughness. In 2009, the NFL declared that it is illegal to blindside block in certain circumstances, hence the previous rule. In 2010, the NFL declared that a player who was just has just completed a catch is protected from blows to the head or neck by an opponent who launches at them. These rules that were put in place during this time still to this day exist, and without them potentially could have caused more injuries to players. Rules implemented from 2011 to 2019. Progressing into present time, the NFL focused on expanding the list of defenseless players and banning blindside hits. To begin, in 2011, the NFL expanded the list of defensive players to include a kicker, punter, a quarterback, and a player who receives a blindside block. This would dramatically change. In 2013, the Health and Safety Committee required that all players wear thigh and knee pads, and not doing so would result in a fine and suspension of future games. In 2016, the committee finally decided to ban all instances of chop blocks and prohibit horse collar tackles. In 2016, the committee finally decided to ban all instances of chop blocks and prohibit horse collar tackles after nearly 40 years of consistent play. In recent years, the NFL has contributed to expand rules and regulations to protect defensive players in the game, as well as adjusting overtime rules. The impact. The impact. Football is a very aggressive sport that has a high risk of injury for players. Whether it be little league, high school, college, or professional, everyone out there on the field is at risk. Therefore, over the last few decades, the NFL and sporting goods companies such as Red Bull has realized the importance of protecting players from potential injury as much as possible. Evolution of football equipment served a great justice by doing so, as well as rules and regulations that were put in place by the NFL. Many adolescents aspire to be professional football players one day, so it is their responsibility to realize that and adapt to modern times so that the next generation has somewhat of an idea to improve the game of football and not to hinder it. That is what the story of football has been about since its creation in the late 1800s, finding ways to better the game. Gladly, the top priority has been to protect player safety by advancing the technology of football equipment and adding rules. Though many have sought out to broaden the negatives of this, there isn't anything in the world that beats safety for others, and potentially yourself.